All right, and so thank you for joining us in the what is our fourth episode of the CircleCI sessions, Open CircleCI sessions, and thank you for joining. We should have looks like we have a good amount of people that have joined us today. Wanted to say, again, welcome. My name is Jeremy Meese. I am the head of DevRel here at CircleCI. Open Circle Sessions is an opportunity for us to enable CircleCI community members to interact directly with CircleCI teams and employees to discuss all things CI/CD and CircleCI. It's also an opportunity for the community kind of in our CircleCI universe, and also serves as kind of that continuous feedback loop between the community and CircleCI. So thank you for joining. I do want to mention before we go any further that towards the end of the session here, there'll be a feedback form, and if you fill out the feedback form, let us know how you enjoyed it, any feedback you did have about it. You'll be entered to win a free set of Sony WH-1000 XM3 headphones. Those are the top of the line noise canceling. They're amazing. So definitely stick around for that. And without further ado, Angel, take it away. I don't have your audio there, Angel.
All right, how about now?
There we go.
All right, thanks,
Everybody,
Jeremy.
Angel, take it
And
away.
thanks. Just wanted to thank everybody for showing up and joining us for the fourth episode of our open circle sessions. We definitely, started this off a few weeks ago thinking like, what the hell, let's give it a shot since everyone's on lockdown. And I'm super happy to see how it's progressing and all the valuable feedback we're getting from the community. So there are some folks getting some uh, good information from us, I guess, and learning a few things. And without further ado, today we're going to speak about a new, fairly new, cool feature that we have at CircleCI. We recently implemented called matrix jobs. So yeah, previous to I was around when they just were releasing version 2 of the platform, or I'm sorry, version 2.1, but I was still kind of on the tail end of when version 2 was released, which was a complete rewrite of the platform. And when they did that, we added things such as Docker container, the ability to build on Docker containers, right? We also revamped. We added the features such as orbs, right? New product orbs, so that it helps people that use CircleCI manage their configurations a little bit better. It also gave parameterized YAML, right? The ability to parameterize things. But one of the features that we kept getting a lot of requests for was this matrix jobs. So what I want to do is introduce Alex, who is an engineer that works at CircleCI, and he was involved in the matrix job project. And we just wanted to bring him on so that he could educate all of us, myself included, on matrix jobs and the benefits of them, right, and how to use them.
Yeah.
So Alex, you're here, all right, and out of Seattle.
I am in
And
Seattle. Yeah, thanks for having me.
yeah, no worries. So it's a little hard to hear you, so you get a little closer to the mic.
Okay, I
Great.
can try to be a little closer. Cool. So I'm Alex. I've been at CircleCI for about a year now, and yeah, we recently did matrix jobs, just pretty fun. I was asked to give a fun fact about myself, and I'm incredibly excited to let you know that in the background I have a picture of space, but I am not actually in space. That's my fun fact. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a musician. I make memes online sometimes, and you should follow me if you care about that stuff.
Yeah, I can attest to Alex's memes. They're pretty good. I always get a laugh. So He's a character. So yeah,
Yeah, I guess let's just kind of jump right into to matrix jobs.
yeah,
So I'll go ahead and share my screen and kind of demonstrate some stuff. So
yeah, that'd be great.
share this. You can see this.
Yes, sir.
All right. So this is just kind of a quick example, and the core idea of matrix jobs is I want to run the same job a lot of times in a lot of variations, right? This comes up a lot when a really big use case, I guess, of matrix jobs tends to be open source, because if you're writing like a really popular library, then it's really important that a certain library work with a lot of different kind of slight variations in environments that your consumers might be on. So like if you're on a JavaScript library, then I need to make sure that this code works on all the different versions of Node that came out recently that our customers might care about. Or I work in Clojure a lot, so in my Clojure libraries, I'm always thinking about like, will this work in all the versions of Clojure? Will it work in all the versions of the JVM and stuff like that? So there are these little parameters that you want to tweak in like each iteration of your test, and so generally a matrix and all the different parameters, there's different dimensions. Like if you're talking about two different platforms versions, or like a version of something in an operating system, then that's like different dimensions that you essentially get this matrix of like kind of like a two-dimensional like rectangle of options, right? So that's where the term matrix comes from. And in the world of CI, the matrix construct is essentially kind of just a tool to really easily automate like actually testing each different case in that diagram. So in this specific example, we have some JavaScript code. I just have kind of a dummy JavaScript library here. And in the config, we're able to actually write a matrix that tests, that runs the test job over all the versions of Node that we care about, and also two different operating systems as well, just for good measure, to make sure it works on both Linux and Mac. And the way that this works is we have to actually parameterize the job first. And this goes back to what Angel was saying about parameterized YAML. And this isn't new. This is something that we've already had. But you can add an input parameter to your job. And so I have a Node version parameter. I have an OS parameter. So for if I didn't have matrices, then the way you would do this is you would kind of invoke the test job a bunch of times. So it'd be like test with Node version 10.9.0 with OS Linux. Great. Okay, now I'm going to copy and paste. And then, copy and paste. And then I'm going to test with Node version 11.9.0 and Linux, and just keep going. So that's how you do it already. It's a bit tedious. But now that there's this other alternative that it's kind of syntactic sugar for generating all that stuff.
So you basically abstracted like almost like a for loop, right? But like a two kind of channel.
Essentially, yeah. It's like a for loop, or even like a nested for loop if you have like two parameters, right? And so kind of the demo here is we have like, once I'm running this, it does actually expand all these jobs. And then one kind of interesting piece of this matrix syntax is it is able to kind of infer what the name of each job is. So like, if you're looking at the workflow, you want to be able to see like, okay, so there's 8 jobs, but each individual job, like what is it responsible for? Yeah. So being able to see, okay, so this line item, so because if one of them failed, then it'd be like, oh, I want to know that node 12.9.1 on Linux is the bad one, right? So you want to be able to click into that and see what happened. But it's.
Can you click into that pipeline, Alex, just to see like how those are all related, I guess?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry, you were in the, right, you were.
Yeah, so this is pipelines, and then the workflow is just a bunch of jobs.
Yeah. So they're going to run concurrent. There's no dependency on each other, right? So they're not. So is that? But is there a way to build a dependency, or just that's not how it works?
That's a good question. Yeah, there are some interesting cases with matrices and dependencies. One of them is in general, you don't want the things in the matrix to depend on each other. That's not super useful because you want it all to be concurrent. And you probably don't really need like one test to depend on a different test. But before and after the test, you might have some interesting cases. Like, let's say I have one pipeline that's gonna do all the testing and then all the deploying, or all the test, all the build, all the deploy. So like, let's say I wanna test it on all the things, then I'm gonna build and like compile it and then ship it. So then you would have like one build job and one deploy job. And then one way you could do that here is you can say, I have a build job that does some stuff, and then it depends on test.
Yeah.
And we can actually just say, and this is kind of a special feature we needed to add to make this work, but you can say test, and that implicitly means all of these test jobs.
Right.
That'll kind of add the arrows in the workflow diagram for all these cases. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
In this case, now we have a build job that will not run until all the tests have succeeded on all the different platforms.
Right. So my question is, I see that you've defined the parameters, right, and the matrix inside of the workflow. Is it possible to bring that up a level into a job?
To actually spell it out in the job itself, all the different values.
Right. Define like, so I could have that test job, just move that matrix bit up into into that test job instead of.
Not really. That's not really something we support right now.
Okay.
And one kind of elegant aspect of the way that it currently works here is that the job doesn't actually have to know that stuff. And I think there's some value in being able to separate those concerns. Right. Where the job is like if you think about like programming and functional programming, where it's like I have a function that has inputs, like it doesn't know what exactly it's going to get used for
Sure.
in the moment, but it has the parameters, and then you separate the code that's actually invoking it with the code that we need. And this extends pretty well into orbs, where if like this test job was actually something that someone defined in an orb, then They definitely don't need to know like what this node version is. But they should expose it as a parameter. But like if it was in an orb or something, it would still work. I could just say orb test.
Right. Because orbs are basically just a way to package up your parameterized kind of bits, right? So an orb is just a nice clean way to include, like you could, so you could actually, this parameter type syntax that you have in that job, in that test job, that could operate in or out of an orb. And again, what an orb does is just nicely packages all that stuff up real nicely so that you can get to it and control it and maintain it in one place.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, it seems like some of the decisions made here were basically, or not basically, but based on some of the underlying language paradigms, right, or constructs, which is pretty interesting.
I would say definitely the stuff that was already in version 2.1 absolutely like laid the groundwork for this, and it made my job actually a lot easier to build this feature because this concept of parameters already existed. And because if you think about like the implementation of a matrix job, it's half about like creating a bunch of jobs, and the other half is about like actually propagating information into the job logic for it to use somehow. So it's like this test job needs to be able to vary up certain aspects of itself and then kind of splice that in somewhere into the config, and that's just something that we had already implemented. And I don't want to put GitHub Actions on blast necessarily, but if you look at the syntax that they used for matrices, you can kind of see that they built out this whole parameterization system just for the matrix aspect. They didn't have that piece already implemented. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you just from my interactions prior to COVID, getting locked down in COVID, and speaking with developers, this topic came up quite a bit because there are features in other products that kind of enable this. And from my understanding, the reason was, we did a complete rewrite of the platform in version 2, and these were just kind of the things that were on the roadmap. And I'm glad to see them come to fruition and become live, because this is very useful for a lot of folks who do repetitive patterns, right? And this will save them a lot of time as well. I mean, if you think about it, right, like a build that you showed how, number one, your configuration would become and I give a talk about this, right? Pipeline sprawl. So same thing, your configuration becomes this huge, massive mess of, even with parameterization, right? It still can get quite lengthy. And now, basically, with this abstraction, you can now shorten all that up. It's gonna grow horizontally, I guess, because that as long as that bracket is there, and it's basically an array list. It looks like, right?
Yeah. It's not just about like the concision of the config, but also it means that there's kind of that, like, this one line of code that you can update, because like new node versions come out all the time, and so like when 14 comes out, I'll be like, okay, 14, I'll just
exactly right. Yeah.
It's less of an issue to kind of like make sure that we're covering all that stuff.
Are there any kind of so let's say, that's a good point you made, but is there any way to, besides deleting, let's say 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, whatever comes out, is there any way to exclude, like, say, prior bits, right?
Yeah, so I mean, you can always take away stuff from this list, but there is a good a kind of a more advanced feature you can use as well, called exclusions. And that's something that we support in this matrix offering. So just as an example, like sometimes the matrix doesn't cleanly fit, where we know that we want to test it on Linux and Mac, we know we want to test it on this range of versions or whatever, but
right.
for whatever reason, maybe like node version 10 doesn't work on Mac anymore, or like there's
right.
this weird little thing that prevents this like one cell of the matrix from being
yeah.
And like that does happen, and we don't want to let that inhibit our ability to like use a matrix and like get a comprehensive test suite as best as we can. So there is a feature where you can say, I think it's exclude, or it's either exclude or exclusions. I forget. I should look at my own docs.
Yeah, let's look at the doc.
Exclude.
There you go.
So exclude, you're basically going to provide a list of like specific cases that we know we just don't want to even like think about right now. So I can say like, like I don't want to do the one where OS is Mac and node version is 10.9.0, and then that'll just exclude that from the. So instead of 8 jobs, it'll be 7 jobs.
Right.
So it doesn't exclude, like, we'll still get the other kind of adjacent parts of the matrix, and we still get some comprehensive testing, but we just don't have to hit this one pain point that we noticed.
Right. Okay. So yeah, no, that's great. And it's at the, like, again, it's at the workflow level, right? So you could do some pretty interesting filtering as well, right? So like if you wanted to only run this on specific branches, right? You can
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps. And another thing I'll mention is that if you want to get into those really complex cases, you can always fall back on not using a matrix, because it's already doable with just invoking a job. Like right. We have those constructs already there for you. So if you like, don't let the matrix is very cool, but don't let it like limit what you want to do with like filtering and branches and tags and like all the stuff that you want to do if it doesn't amend itself. And then you can kind of do the full expansion if you really need.
Yeah, I could see this being primarily useful for, again, repeatable patterns, right? Things that you're going to do all the time. And yeah, don't get too wild with this. And because I can already see a few people like, I actually thought, to be fair, even before or after reading your blog, I still thought that this was mainly pertaining to, the versions of building versions of stacks, right? So, and it's really cool to see that you could actually, do some more robust things with this matrix job, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's an interesting segue to kind of a different potential use case I realized could potentially be used with matrices. This is more of like a sketch that I made, but I realized kind of after we started building the matrix that because the matrix is essentially kind of a for loop, then
Right.
you can now use the matrix construct for any time that you wish you had a for loop in config, which could be a lot of things, like even more things than I thought was needed. So like,
Yeah.
I was just kind of looking through our own internal code, and I noticed that we have, because CircleCI publishes a lot of Docker images. That's kind of our thing.
Oh yes. Yeah.
And so we have some code, like at least a couple of repositories that just have a bunch of Docker files in it, and we just
Right.
images a lot. And so our CircleCI config is basically like go into all these subdirectories and do a Docker build and publish. And so that is very amenable to, I guess, a one-dimensional matrix, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
And so so here's a potential sketch of that where you can say like, okay, now let's parameterize the path of this subdirectory in the repo. Let's do the build, and then let's just automate that with kind of a matrix for loop, if you will, or a one-dimensional matrix.
So let me ask you a question though. With this Docker build image example you have, right? Let's say I have a in the steps, right? I guess I could call another job a job right inside of that job, like a nest, right?
Yeah, or
Right.
a command. Yeah.
A command, right? Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. So this is pretty interesting because I know for me at least, I'm going to start looking at kind of cleaning up and making the pipeline's a little bit more optimized. So encapsulation, I guess, within the config. Because this is pretty interesting stuff. I actually tend to repeat myself quite a bit in a lot of cases. But yeah, looking at this, I could see where I could optimize, right, and eliminate some of that syntax that I will have to maintain, right, and then go up and down inside the config. I know a lot of our customers as well build multiple versions of Docker containers based on certain parameters and such. Even though that might not be the best way to architect or design a container, but still, right? People have just different needs and different, I guess, knowledge, right, and experience with these things. So I think as they grow into using the config and then learning about these new features, that could change.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
So right, so this, like, again, could be very useful in I guess in like a mono repo. We get that quite a bit, right? So a lot of folks are asking about operations for mono repo, like support within Circle. Could Matrix like help solve some of those issues, or at least
maybe? Yeah, I think there's a bunch of facets to mono repo support,
for sure.
If I said matrices were the answer to mono repo support in CircleCI, that would be very wrong.
Oh, you'd have a lot of people.
There's a lot more there, one piece of monorepo support is how do I kind of run a similar task over all the different subdirectories in my project and not have that result in sprawling config, and matrices will absolutely help with that. There are other things like how do I from one commit to the next commit, I'm kicking off a CircleCI build, how do I make sure that I only rebuild the projects in my monorepo that actually changed? And that's another really important facet of monorepo support, and this would not solve that at all. But that's kind of still on the table to be addressed.
No, yeah, I could see that. I could see that because so like, you can make a change once, but then at that point, you should probably be looking at orbs to encapsulate and then propagate that change from the orb itself instead of. So all you have to do there is a version number change, and that's an easy sed command. And you could probably even do a matrix job to, run a sed on a specific config file calling GitHub. And so we're getting kind of deep into the matrix. I think did you blue pill me or which was the pill that got you out of the matrix?
I think the red pill.
The red pill.
It
There
was
you
the
go.
red.
So, yeah, so I was
Red
blue
pill.
pilled,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So we have a question here from Leon.
Wait, let him ask it, yeah?
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do here. So
Oh,
I'm
I'm
going
sorry.
to allow you to talk, Leon. Gonna
If you
trade
want.
chance here with you, and go ahead and voice your question.
Awesome, thanks. So with the matrices, by the way, sounds super awesome. Haven't tried it yet, and definitely going to do it. Can I also specify like different context objects that my builds would depend on, and things like different versions of orbs? Would that be very similar to what you just had as the OS and Note versions, or is that something that?
That's very interesting. So, so context, you mean like a different, like secure context with like environment variables?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think orb versions, no. Context versions, possibly. I'm curious. I haven't thought about that, but let me explore that real quick and just see what would happen. So,
Yeah.
Right now in matrices, there is a bit of a so for the different dimensions of a matrix, or actually, hold on, I'll back up a little bit. So one thing that we do support in the matrix is we do allow you to put kind of just regular job fields on the job, but template it out with whatever was in the matrix. So I could say like, so if we for whatever reason had, or I'll jump back into my other example actually. So if we have our JavaScript project, you can do something like if you just have one context, you can just specify the context and say like my context. But if you actually wanted to, if the context were correlated to whatever OS you were on, for example, you could say like matrix.os as part of this and kind of template it in. So that is one option that you have, and then it'll actually splice it in. And then if you wanted to actually kind of like run the same test different times with like a different context, you might be able to leverage this. You might have to kind of make a dummy parameter in the job in order to make it happen, or you could say like context version, so that then I could actually specify in these parameters and then it wouldn't break. And then, like something like this, and then say like context version X, Y, then this would work, I think. Does that kind of answer your question? That's like that's a potential way around. I think orb version's not really doable because we have, because the compilation kind of happens at the very beginning of all of this, and that includes like pulling in all the orbs.
Yeah, awesome. That answers my question exactly. Thank you.
Sweet, cool. That's a good question.
Yeah. So,
Right.
is there anybody else that has a question about matrix jobs or anything Circle, really? I mean, Alex is here.
We're here.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about just config in general, or any concerns you have with your config or something like that.
Otherwise, I'll just ask him all the questions I want to know the answers to, and that's no fun. Yeah. So, we were talking about also, a little bit earlier today, or last time we met, about maybe, so obviously we going to optimize, right? If you're using matrices, you're interested in optimizing your pipeline in certain aspects. We had Glenn Mailer. I'm sure you know who he is.
Yeah.
And we had him on talking about optimizations of pipelines, and he gave us some really good tips and kind of thoughts on what he likes to do. He's pretty intense, right? When it comes to the optimization piece, which is great. We need more of that. Make things faster. So, what are some of the, opinions you have about optimizing configurations? Like, what are some of the things you do in your configs to optimize?
Yeah, I've been using CircleCI since before I started working here, actually, because at my last job, they were a customer of CircleCI, so I got to actually get really familiar with like the other side of like being a developer, working on CircleCI.
that seems to be a recurring pattern. I was also a customer for years before I started working at Circle, and I think it helps when when you come in as a customer. Yeah, I think with any product, right? If you were a user, and then you're actually working there helping to build it and maintain it, you kind of appreciate like, oh wow, that's how that used to happen, right? Because I used to think about like things. How are they getting this to do what it's doing? And sure enough, when you pull that curtain back and you can see the wizard, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think like in all my experience writing CircleCI configs and such, I think one thing I keep kind of coming back to is something I've always strived to achieve is reliability in my pipelines. And thing like, I mean, there's a few there's a lot of different sides to reliability, and there's like, is CircleCI the platform reliable, or is there? But there's also like, is my own pipeline going to actually like do the right thing even when the machine is working underneath it? And depending on the testing patterns you use or the languages you use, like the behavior of your tests might not be like deterministic enough. And I think that's really important, because I'm curious, I don't know like how many folks here in the webinar have worked on have made a pull request to their repo, and their CI fails, and they think in the back of their head like, oh yeah, it's probably just like a flaky test, I just need to retry.
Right.
And that's really annoying when that's like a possibility. And it's really, and it means that like the difference between a CircleCI pipeline that works 99% of the time and a pipeline that works 100% of the time is so big. It's such a big.
Oh yeah. I had just yesterday we were doing a live stream with the company Solace, and I was trying to demo, and I pre-baked a few things, and what I was doing was deploying the application, using the pipeline to using Terraform and GKE, and so we spent literally like almost 2 hours, hour and a half on my part, just trying to get this going, which is fun, right? We had a good time. But at the end of the day, nothing had changed on my pipeline, right? Like it was working 100%. The only thing that did change was I had regened an API key, right, to Terraform's cloud, and I regened a key that didn't have the appropriate rights to manage the state of that deployment. So like it was just so we're going back and forth, and I'm pretty obsessive about this stuff. Yeah. And as soon as I got off, I started looking, and I was like, the only thing that changed really was this key. So when I went and regened the appropriate key, right, boom, everything lit up, right? So yeah, those are the little details that, one thing was changed, and I'm thinking, wow, this was, because we were building a new code base, all this stuff. But the underlying deployment code should have worked. And so that definitely happens to me quite often. When my builds or my pipelines fail, especially I do a lot of demos, so I don't change much as far as the underlying code goes. Once it's there, I mint it, and hopefully don't have to change it. But I think, you were with me at Seattle when I was doing Delivery Conf. I had to do another talk after, and my example was broken, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, I haven't touched this in months. Everything was working. What happened was an upstream dependency in the Python library I was using. Oof. The maintainers did some weird thing where it required a really weird old bit of a dependency, or a version of a dependency, and that took a dump. Luckily I wasn't the only one, so there was a quick way to fix it. But if your pipelines are breaking, and especially I think there's more appropriate with a deployment pipeline, right? That like those things should probably always work, right? And then the general kind of bits that break are like, integrations. And I think, build matrix brings a nice, or the matrix job brings a nice thought to my head especially with like, I'm a big proponent of for production level pipelines, right? I like to front load those pipelines with all the smoke tests. So what I mean by that is, if you have a pipeline that's going to integrate into, like, let's say it's dependent on like maybe 3 APIs from different, maybe a GitHub API, or you're crawling out to a REST, a couple of REST APIs, whatever it is that you're doing. The first thing you should always do is test, do I have connectivity, right? Because sometimes those third parties are down, and you should fail that job right away instead of expending all that money, right? And effort, right? So like,
well,
I could
and that's
see
what's happened with yeah, I mean, I was gonna say that's what, everything going down, that's what happens with a lot of the services over the last couple of weeks have been in apps. They've been using third parties without having those checks in place.
Yeah, and with a pipeline though, right? So when I'm I could see writing a matrix that basically doing a curl request, right? And cycling through that list of URLs and saying, hey, fail this thing. If any one of these whatever you're required, then boom, done, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is pretty
Really
interesting. I mean, now you're getting my pipeline food building thoughts percolating with this.
Yeah,
sure.
no, and yeah, it's something I think we're all kind of constantly thinking about with our own pipelines. But I think like there are always going to be these kind of forks in the road where you notice that something about your pipeline is either giving you false positives or false negatives, or if it's a false positive, that's like really bad, and that's kind of something you can add checks to. And I think the false negatives kind of maybe get a little bit they're a little more tempting to ignore, right? Where it's like I have either a flaky test, or I'm like using some mechanism of like dependency pulling that is more prone to break in kind of a mysterious way or something like that. And it's like I would definitely encourage people to take the path in the fork in the road that will allow them to have more trust in their own CI, because it really helps a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Spending like a few minutes, just add a line, making it clear why something fails, adding or like fixing a test that is testing a complex thing so that it's a little more reliably kind of work when it works, is always a good investment, I've found.
Yeah, I had this demo where I was kind of showing off smoke testing a Docker image that was built in a pipeline, then deployed right to a live GKE cluster, and all of it was provisions in the pipeline. And at the end of it, it was a web app. So one of the smoke tests was, hey, do I get an OK200? Do I get a 404? Do I get all these things? But when I was initially developing it, I didn't have a destroy of that infrastructure. So the pipeline, kept building. And then I was like, oh crap, I need to add a clause here where it will destroy regardless, right? So as you develop these things, and that goes, I think, to like a test-driven development mentality, which I don't have, right? I came up the old school way of building software, which was like, just here's a requirement, start coding, build a test after. So I'm grappling still, with all these new ways of building software. I think we have. Do we have any questions here?
I was gonna say that's probably a good opportunity. So Rodolfo, if you're there, I'm gonna go ahead and allow you to talk. You had a couple questions that I think would be good nice spot to throw in here.
Hey.
Hello.
I have a question.
Can you speak up, Rodolfo?
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Just barely.
Okay. How do you share paths between builds in CircleCI?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So by sharing a path, do you mean sort of like I have a file in one job that I want to pass to the next job, or what?
Something like building packages, for example, in Node.js, if I want to share Node modules folder.
Yeah, I think you might want to check out our workspaces feature in our config. I think that might be similar to what you're looking for potentially.
If caching?
Yeah, maybe, because yeah, those are kind of two good. They're sort of our best mechanisms right now for having a build that like generates some files on disk
Yeah.
that you want like another future job to have access to and use. So that might be helpful for your use case.
Are you aware of the caching and workspaces mechanism, Rudolfo?
Yeah, I think that that cache system could be work.
Yeah, are you trying to because if you're doing a Node app, I definitely would recommend looking into caching because that will help you with speed as well. You know what I mean? So the way that it works is there's the first thing you would do is restore the cache, right, before you even do an npm install in your job. So if this way the system works is if you implement a cache call and nothing exists, right? If it's empty, then the first time you run it, it's going to take it should be the longest time, and then at the end of your of your run of your pipeline, you just do save cache, and then every time after that, any subsequent build in that project will restore that cache. Then you do an npm install, which should update, right, all the packages based off of your package file, whatever version you have there, and then move down. So instead of, like, let's say you have 100 dependencies and only 2 change, you're not updating the whole thing, right? You're just updating those 2, and it moves super quickly through.
Oh, cool. That sounds good. Thanks.
Ed, you're welcome.
I think you had another question as well, if you want to ask while you're here.
Yeah, my other question is, I am new in CircleCI, and I am doing a lot of commits to test my config.yaml. So there is a way to test this config.yaml configuration in localhost or locally instead of push a lot of commits?
Yeah, so if you're interested in testing your builds locally, there is a feature of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the CircleCI CLI, but that does actually have, if you install that, then you get a bunch of commands at your terminal that you can use with CircleCI. One of those is local build, where you can actually kind of simulate CircleCI a little bit in the and so that'll kind of let you kind of like see what'll happen if you were to push it. But another thing I'll say, kind of based on that question, is don't be ashamed of running too many builds because like everyone, not just new users of CircleCI, I think actually the sign of a really experienced user of CI is that they've really embraced the flow of pushing code and seeing the feedback that comes back and using that as a tool to inform, because I know that like when I was kind of not very experienced in CI, I was kind of like, I felt like I had to play the guessing game of like whether my build is going to pass before I would push, because it would suck if the build failed. But the reason that CI is there is that it's there to kind of help you find issues really quickly. And especially if you've optimized your pipeline to, use concurrency and be quick about kind of letting you know if something doesn't work, then it can actually be a really useful tool, and it'll actually be advantageous for you to push often and see what happens, right? So I don't think that needing to push a lot of new builds and seeing the status of them is a bad thing. So I would definitely kind of embrace that, if that makes sense.
Right. And that CLI tool, you could also use it to validate your config too, right? So if you have any kind of formatting issues and things like that, it's kind of a pre-processor.
Yeah.
So that'll help, but I'm not sure, is workflow still, right? It doesn't really simulate that very well.
Yeah, I think if you do a local build, you kind of have to like pinpoint a specific job and run that specific one and simulate that. So things like workspaces and I don't know I'm not sure if we do caching yet on the local builds, but workspace definitely will be a little awkward because you can't actually like test the link between 2 different jobs necessarily. But if you just have this one, if you have basically a workflow containing one important job in it, then you can kind of just test that one locally.
Yeah,
Okay.
Rodolfo, I've added it to the link to the CLI in the chat. So everyone who's on, just go to, it's in our CircleCI, just do a CircleCI CLI search on Google. You can find the documentation there. And that should help you, solve some of those issues. But yeah, I use it when I'm doing but like Alex said, you have to target a specific job because it won't run the whole pipeline. And the reason is, right, it's obvious. You don't have the CircleCI platform on the back end for that CLI tool to connect, right? So and maybe in the future, that's maybe on the roadmap, Alex, that you could work on is a simulator.
Yeah, maybe. And that is absolutely, like, that area is something that we're trying to kind of invest more into, and we do look at the GitHub issues for the CLI, and we kind of try to see like what's the most useful thing to work on, and that might come up as an option.
All right, so we're coming up on the 10-minute mark. Last call for questions, because it's Thursday, and we want to answer all your questions, but trying to keep it to the hour today. So please, I'll give it a minute or two, and then if not, we'll hear special thanks from or a special song from Alex. No. Did you prepare anything today? He's also a musician, everyone.
Yes, I did not prepare any musical content to end this.
Damn it.
Probably just as well for today.
Yeah.
So so I think not seeing anything else come on. What I will say, thanks Mike for joining, everyone else for joining here and mentioning a great demo. I will say that this will be trimmed up and then will be thrown up on YouTube as well. Follow us out on all the relevant social media out there.